I find that moving always shows me just how much stuff I have. And it makes sense because when you move, you actually have to go through all of that stuff. And a lot of the time, for a lot of us, that's the only time that we ever actually go through every single thing in our home and kind of decide what to do with it. Decide if it's worth taking it with us, if it's something that needs to be left behind or sold or donated. And I feel like for me that becomes even more difficult to do when I'm not only going through a physical transition, so moving from one house to another, but I'm also going through a little bit of a personal transition. I think lately I've been going through a personal transition in various areas of my life. And by lately, I mean the past year or so. It's not like recently, within the past few weeks, I've gone through a bunch of changes. It's just been quite the past year, and my hobbies have changed quite a bit. The type of movement that I do has changed quite a bit. You know, instead of not moving as much as I would like to, I'm now trying to do more slacklining and going out in nature more often, and I do Lyra a couple times a week at least. I've also been going to therapy pretty regularly, which is nice, and I've been learning a lot more about things like ADHD, which is something that I was just diagnosed with last year and kind of had to do some catch up on because I really didn't know much about it. I have an entirely different community now, and I have entirely different relationships now. And I think that the amalgamation of all of those little changes over the course of the past year has resulted in like quite the personal shift. And I think moving physically, like to a new home, was kind of the final push of that personal transition that has now led me to a place where I kind of just want to purge my stuff again. And I want to be super intentional about it because I don't want to purge and then just buy a bunch of new stuff. I'm at this point again that I've been at before, but it's been difficult to maintain, where I want to get rid of a bunch of things, not for the purpose of replacing them with other things, but just because I know I don't need them. So I rewatched The Minimalists last night, which is a documentary on Netflix that actually inspired my initial videos on minimalism that you can find here if you would like. I made some of those a few years ago when I was still living in Waterloo, and it's interesting how rewatching it now with new perspectives around my mental health and my habits and the way that I view the world, and those things have changed. And it's interesting to rewatch that documentary now and see kind of why I was inspired in the first place, and also where I went wrong the first time that I tried to kind of minimize the things that I owned, because I ended up buying more things again. So I've started to go through all of my things again and kind of try and sort out what I want to keep going into the next chapter of my life, and things that I kind of want to let go of that I think are no longer serving me and that would be better off out in the world being of use to someone else. I think that downsizing also really shows you just how little you need. Like for 2 weeks, I lived at my partner's house where I was just sharing a room with him, and it's been a very, very long time since I shared a single room with another person. And for most of those 2 weeks, all of my stuff was kind of packed up in boxes. So that really gives you a bit of a perspective on what you actually use and what you don't use, because there were some things that I was, digging through boxes to find because I felt like I needed them. And then there were other things that I didn't think about and kind of forgot existed until I pulled them out when I got to the new place. And I'm excited to just like feel refreshed in my new space and to have less of a focus on stuff and the things that I own, and more of a focus on the way that I'm spending my time, and especially now that I live in a collective with a community of other humans that I want to spend more time with. And I want to have less of a focus on the convenience of being able to get resources so easily and so quickly, and spend more time on making intentional use of the resources and the things that I already have. Because I do think that I'm someone that easily convinces myself that I need something in order to be a little bit happier or be a little bit more efficient. All of my notebooks, for example. And the more I learn about myself and my environment, the more I learn that that's just not true. And it's something that I've just convinced myself of through many different factors and habits that I've developed over my life. So I think it's time to go through kind of a cycle of cleansing and really become more intentional with the material items that I have. One of the things that I do have a difficult time getting rid of is books, because I love books and I'm a writer, and books have just brought me so much joy that it's really difficult to get rid of something like that. And a lot of these books are really meaningful to me as well, because they're from indie authors that I've met online, and you know, people that I've gotten the opportunity to talk to about their book, and I feel almost like a personal connection to it, I guess. So I'm going to start with the books. When I'm going through my books, things that I want to keep in mind to kind of help with it is that when it comes to books that I've already read that I'm having a difficult time getting rid of, I want to remind myself that I'm having a hard time getting rid of them because I loved them and I really enjoyed them. By donating them or giving them away to people or putting them in one of like the free little libraries around the city, not only am I cleansing my own space, but I'm also giving someone else the opportunity to enjoy a story that I loved so much. So I'm going to keep that in mind for books that I have read that I'm having a difficult time getting rid of. When it comes to indie authors, I think I might get rid of most of them, even if I haven't read them, but I'm going to keep track of which ones I've gotten rid of that I still want to read, because then chances are I will be able to read them in the future and I can try and request them from a library and hopefully help out the author that way. Or I can get an audiobook version or a Kindle Unlimited version, which again is a way to help out the author and get another form of their book. And then it's just like I'm supporting the author twice. So that's what I'm going to try and keep in mind when it comes to the indie authors. And then for the rest of the books that I have not read, my goal is to come out of this situation and have basically enough books to cover the next 6 months if I were to read a book once per week, which I haven't been doing lately and I can't see myself doing right now anyways. But I figured if I kept a book a week for the next 6 months, that's 4 books a month times 6 is 24. That means that I'll have 24 books on my TBR, and it'll be less difficult to choose what to read because there's so fewer and I won't get overwhelmed by all of the options. And even if I did get into a real reading kick and I did read a book once a week for the next 6 months, I would still have enough unread books to read for the next 6 months, which is, I feel like that's more than reasonable. So that's the plan for the bookshelf. We're getting somewhere. Sometimes, just a little tip when it comes to decluttering, if you're kind of new to it and you're trying to take a more intentional approach, sometimes it's really hard to be intentional about everything that you're digging through and think so hard about every single thing that you might want to keep, might want to get rid of. And sometimes it's like thought fatigue, you know? Like sometimes I'm using my brain so much to try and decide if these things are things that, in the words of Marie Kondo, spark joy in my life. And I'm using a lot of brain power and almost overwhelming myself to try and really, really crack down on, is this going to serve me in the future? Does it still make me happy? What am I using it for? What am I keeping it for? Where did it come from? And sometimes if I'm struggling with that and it's kind of possibly slowing down my momentum or getting me stuck in this constant cycle of like, I don't need it, but I love it, or I don't use it anymore, but it still has value to me, I'll go and I'll declutter something that is easy to declutter. So this might vary depending on who you are and what you're interested in keeping around your home, but for me, things like that include like trinkets. In my case, that usually is in the form of rocks or stones or just like little bits and pieces that I've collected, like sea glass or just anything like that. I'll go and sort through those things because generally those are easy for me to sort through. I'll also do it with like pens and pencils and writing utensils and kind of like stationery. That one's always an easy one as well because you can sit down and like literally use each pen or pencil, and if it doesn't work, you don't need it anymore. Sometimes I'll also do it with jewelry. Sometimes I have quite the influx of jewelry. I really like jewelry, so it's easy for me to collect more jewelry than I should, but I also find it fairly easy for me to let go of at least a few pieces. So if you're struggling and you're trying to be intentional to the best of your ability, but it's kind of slowing you down, or you're getting tired of trying to figure out how to be intentional about larger or more important items, maybe start with something that's small and easy for you to go through. Like maybe your sock and underwear drawer. I'm sure there's underwear in there that's multiple years old that you could probably get rid of at this point, or socks that are this close to having a hole in the bottom that it's probably time for them to move on. Take advantage of how easy some things can be to minimize in order to keep your momentum going. On a mostly unrelated note, but also it kind of has to do with intention behind all the things that I do, I'm gonna start shooting, I'm gonna try to start shooting more in manual, because the whole ISO flipping around on me when I'm shooting in automatic all the time is frustrating me. I just watched back that last clip and I feel like the ISO was kind of all over the place. So I'm gonna be a bit more intentional with how I'm shooting and the clips that I'm getting. And I'm gonna probably switch back to manual, because I should also still, as someone who literally went to film school, I should probably still be comfortable with using manual and actually setting my settings, and I'm not anymore, and that's really embarrassing to admit. So we're gonna work on that. I'd say I ended up getting through the clothes fairly quickly. Actually, I was a little bit nervous for them because I've been really struggling to get rid of clothes lately. Only because I feel like my style's been changing. Not even necessarily my style, but maybe I'm just like going more towards more comfortable clothes. I also still to this day had stuff that didn't quite fit me. They were things that technically could fit me, but also they were from a time when I wore like skinny jeans, for example, or super tight like tank tops and kind of fancy tops, because I was in university and I was like going to bars more often. So there were quite a few things like that still, because like I graduated university right before the pandemic hit, or actually technically as the pandemic hit. So I was getting out of that phase and then just going straight into like lockdown for multiple years. So I think like most of us, we didn't really understand like what would happen and how things would change. I kept a lot of that stuff that I ended up getting rid of yesterday. Also, another thing that has changed, and I'm talking a lot about change in this video, I feel like, because like I kind of mentioned, there were just so many changes that have been happening, and even though these changes were happening, there were a lot of things, especially things like the material items that I own, that weren't really changing along with those life changes, I guess. So another change was that I also had a 9-to-5 office job for 3 months, and I had every intention of staying at that job for, you know, at least a year or so. which obviously did not happen, but because of that I still bought clothes that were suitable for that job, because a lot of what I was previously wearing was for all of the remote and like freelance work that I was doing, and I didn't need business casual clothes for that. And then all of a sudden I went from not really having any business casual clothes to needing business casual every single day at work. So I went out and got clothes for that. So I ended up getting rid of quite a few pieces of like business casual clothing as well during this purge, because I don't need that stuff anymore. I'm working fully remote again and fully freelance this time, and I still have a couple things that are on the nicer side in case I need them, but the reality is that I just really don't need them right now. I do still have a few things to go through, so I'll probably do that at some point over the weekend, but for now I'm really happy with where I got to. I don't know if you can see it, but that pile of stuff is all stuff that I'm getting rid of. I got rid of probably like 50 books, I think 30 or so pieces of clothing. I think that one thing that I've also been thinking about this kind of cycle of decluttering is that I'm just constantly reminded that there's so much more to minimizing the things that you want in your life than just, you know, getting rid of everything and starting again and trying not to buy anything at all. It's so much more about intention, and I do feel better as I settle further into the idea and the concept that minimalism as a movement and as a concept itself is less about trying to have as few things as possible, because for a lot of us that's not possible and we don't want as few things as possible. And it's more about loving the things that you do have and being intentional with the things that you do have and the material items and the resources that you already have. It's about finding more value in those things, the things that you already have, versus entirely detaching value from like material items. I know it's a long process and I'm not quite done, but I am feeling really happy, and even my brain feels a little bit less cluttered now that I've gone through and done so much of it. I hope that you enjoyed this video. I had fun making it. I think it's really interesting to see how things like that change over the years, since I've done multiple videos like this already. And it's really interesting to see how I change over the years as well, compared to what I was doing in those videos and how I felt about the whole situation of minimalism. But I hope that you enjoyed the video. Please like it if you did so that I know, and subscribe if you would like more content from me. Don't forget to smile, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.